What if I told you Japan might actually be stronger without some of its biggest stars? That sounds ridiculous because before the tournament even started, Japan suffered major blows. Kaoru Mitoma was out, Takumi Minamino was out, Captain Wataru Endo was out too. For many teams, losing 3 leaders before a World Cup is a disaster. For Japan, somehow it became an opportunity. Fast forward to today, and Japan have already delivered one of the most entertaining matches of the tournament with a dramatic 2-2 draw against the Netherlands. Suddenly, people aren't asking whether Japan can survive the group stage anymore. They're asking something much bigger. How far can Japan actually go? Because for years, Japan has been called the sleeping giant of world football. But what if they're finally awake? Let's take a deep dive. Before this World Cup even began, the headlines surrounding Japan were not optimistic. Kaoru Mitoma, arguably their most dangerous 1-versus-1 player, was ruled out with a hamstring injury. Takumi Minamino also suffered an ACL injury, while Captain Wataru Endo withdrew due to ankle injury before announcing his retirement from international football. Losing that amount of experience should have broken their momentum. Instead, something fascinating happened. Japan became less dependent on individuals and more dependent on systems. In a strange way, this version of Japan feels like PSG under Luis Enrique. Less superstar football, more collective football. Hajime Moriyasu has spent years building this identity, and now we're seeing the final evolution of that project. This is no longer a team that sits back and hopes for counterattacks. This is a team that genuinely believes it can dictate games against football giants. Somewhere in Tokyo, football anime writers are probably taking notes because reality is becoming harder to script than fiction. If you haven't watched Japan versus the Netherlands yet, go watch it immediately after this video, because that's probably the most entertaining game of the World Cup so far. Japan came back twice to secure a 2-2 draw against one of Europe's strongest teams. Virgil van Dijk scored, Crescencio Somerville scored, but every time the Dutch pulled ahead, Japan found another answer. Keito Nakamura equalised first, and then the luck of Daichi Kamada delivered an 88th-minute equaliser. With this draw, Japan's unbeaten record against European teams remains intact. They looked like they belonged at this level. This team doesn't play with an inferiority complex anymore. There was a time when Asian teams entered World Cups hoping to avoid embarrassment. Japan now enters games expecting to compete. That mentality shift is perhaps their greatest weapon. Even Dutch manager Ronald Koeman admitted afterwards that Japan's quality should never be underestimated. That's a sentence we may hear a lot over the next few weeks. Japan's tactical setup deserves far more attention. Moriyasu has experimented with a fluid 3-4-3 system that doesn't rely on traditional wingbacks pushing high up the field. Instead, the structure becomes extremely dynamic. The forwards rotate, midfielders stand by, and off-the-ball movements in the final third are incredibly fluid. This is what makes Japan dangerous. They don't simply attack with speed anymore, they attack with intelligence. Watch their positioning carefully. In the final third, players constantly create triangles and passing lanes that pull defenders out of shape. Their pressing is also coordinated rather than chaotic. Surprises also occurred in this match. Japan's coach, Hajime Moriyasu, went viral for flashing giant numbers like 45, 3, 2, or 1 on a handheld whiteboard. Experts and fans decoded this unique sideline tactic into a match countdown or a coded playbook if some situations happened. Unfortunately, Japan seemed to be holding back against the Netherlands. They only seemed to attack and play freely as usual in the final 10 minutes. And for last concern, their defense is what needs improvement. They need to defend more compactly by utilizing a mid-block and 5 defenders. As impressive as Japan have been collectively, there is still one problem they haven't fully solved yet: finishing. Japan create plenty of chances, but against elite teams, efficiency becomes everything. For years, Japanese football has been searching for one final ingredient: a world-class striker capable of deciding games with a single opportunity. Players like Ayase Ueda have proven they can score consistently at Eredivisie, with 25 goals in one season. But Japan still lacks that ruthless World Cup superstar profile. Interestingly, the country is already trying to solve this problem, and somehow manga and anime is involved. In 2026, before the World Cup, the Japan Football Association officially launched Future Camp, inspired by Blue Lock, a talent identification project designed to discover Japanese talents overseas and develop future attacking stars. No, they're not locking 300 teenagers inside a football prison, but the philosophy is surprisingly similar. The idea is simple. Japan doesn't just want to produce good footballers anymore, they want to produce game changers. And honestly, that's the scary part, because if this current Japan team is already this dangerous without Mitoma, Minamino and Endo, imagine what happens when they eventually produce a true world-class striker in the future. Now, we have to be realistic. Can Japan win the World Cup? Probably not. At least, not yet. Depth eventually matters. Experience eventually matters. There are still teams like France, Argentina, Spain, Germany, and Portugal who possess world-class players across every position. However, dismissing Japan as a quarter-final team would also be a mistake. This could genuinely be their best opportunity ever to break their historical ceiling. Japan have reached the round of 16 4 times in their history, but they've never reached the quarter-finals. This team absolutely has the capability to change that. If their tactical structure remains consistent and they avoid major injuries, a quarter-final appearance is a realistic expectation. In the end, everything is still according to the Japanese Football Federation's plan to win the World Cup in 2050. Japan's story is bigger than football. For decades, Asian football has fought for global respect. Every tournament, people ask whether Asian teams can compete with Europe and South America. But perhaps we've been asking the wrong question all along. Up until June 16, 2026, Asian teams are still undefeated. Maybe the question isn't whether Asia can compete anymore. Maybe it's who will become Asia's first true football superpower. Right now, Japan looks like the closest answer we've ever had. But what do you think? Is this finally the World Cup where Japan breaks its historical barrier and reaches the semi-finals? Or will reality eventually catch up to them? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy football documentaries that go beyond the headlines and explore the deeper stories behind the game, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next one.